So welcome to another Photoshop tutorial. In this tutorial I will show you how I made this manipulation, which I called the Fallen Angel. This is going to be a bit more advanced because I will use the mixer brush tool, and I'll make some shadows, and I'll show you how to add the hair on the model here. I'll show you how to add this hair here and how to make this statue here a bit smoother, and how to use the dodging and burning tool and things like that, and how to add some makeup, how to smoothen the skin, and things like that. So let's get started. I'll show you first the stock images that I used for this. So these are the stock images that I used for this manipulation. I have the statue, the woman, and the foreground already extracted. This is a transparent PNG file, so you don't have to cut the wings. The hair is also a transparent PNG file. Actually, it's a Photoshop file. And the background is a JPEG. So I already have this one extracted from the background, as I said, because I will not spend time doing that on the tutorial. There are a lot of ways you can do that, and you should know how to extract the subjects from the background. So these are the extracted images, and this is the canvas size that I used for the original artwork, but for this tutorial I'll make it a bit smaller. So I'll use 180. I'll constrain the proportions first, something like that, and I'll get rid of the final result and start with the foreground and the background. So I'll first open the foreground image. As I said, I already have it extracted from the background. You can use the pen tool, or you can use whatever method you like to extract subjects from the background. And I'll place it here, and then I'll open the pre-made background image. You can use any background here. Just use this dark one, but you can use any forest or whatever you want. But I liked this kind of desert here with this tone of blue, so I used this one. And I'll delete the original background. I'll name this and this one to foreground, and I'll add some Gaussian blur to the background. And the reason why I do that is because I'm not really interested in the background. You can leave it that way if you want, because it's quite nice, it's sharp, and you can leave it that way, but I'm not really interested in the background. I just want to focus on the woman and on the statue that I will add here later on. So I'll add some Gaussian blur. So go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian blur, and add 3 or 4 pixels of blur. Let's go with 3 pixels because this is a smaller canvas size. On the original I used 4 pixels. And what we have to do now, I used the background as my starting point. So all the elements that I will add next, like the foreground, the woman, and the statue, I will use adjustment layers to make them fit this background color and contrast. And as usually, I always use adjustment layers for that. So for the background, for the foreground, I first used a hue saturation as a clipping mask because the background is already set, and I only want to affect the foreground. And the first thing I did is desaturate it. So type -65 on the saturation to desaturate it. Not completely, but almost, so you can see a before and after. And then I added another adjustment layer. This time I want to adjust the contrast and the overall lightness of this, because you can see that the background is a bit darker. So I'll add the curves again as a clipping mask. If you press the Alt key and put the mouse between 2 layers, you can see it changes, and that allows you to make a clipping mask if you click. And just click here on the middle point and drag down just a bit like that to make it darker. And then to match the color I use the solid color, and I also have the exact color code, and click OK. Again, make this as a clipping mask, change the blend mode to soft light, and the opacity leave it at 100%. And you can see that now we have the foreground, it matches the background a lot better. So once your foreground matches your background, you can add the woman. So you can open this and extract it from the background. I'll open it and just copy it and close this. I no longer need it, and just paste it here. I'll make this into a smart object because I have to scale it down, and I always like to turn it into a smart object. And just place it here on this bench. Just don't put it here in the middle, it's not looking too nice. Just put it here on the side, here on the left or on the right, wherever you want, but just don't put it right there in the middle. And maybe a bit bigger, like that, and press enter. And now if I want to scale it down or up again, I can do that because I have it as a smart object and the information is not lost. Something like that. A bit higher. Actually I have to put the foreground a bit higher, like that, and now I can move the woman up just a bit, like that. Change the layer name, and all you have to do now, once you have the woman here, is just start matching the color and the contrast to the background. And the only way to do that is using adjustment layers. But before I use adjustment layers, what I wanted to do is just make the skin a bit smoother, and this is where I use the mixer brush tool. I just recently discovered this tool, and I really like it to make the skin smooth. You can use the surface blur if you want, because this is maybe for beginners is a tricky tool to use. So if you cannot use this tool, you just go to filter, blur, surface blur, and actually have to make a duplicate of this layer, apply surface blur, and then use a layer mask to hide the effect where you don't want it. But for this I use the mixer brush tool, so I'll create a new layer, name it smooth skin. I'll make it a clipping mask, and with this tool just set all the settings to 12 or something like that, but lower values are better. And just make sure you check this option that says sample all layers. And once you're done that, just start painting. Use a soft brush, increase the size, and start painting. This tool works almost like the smudge tool, so you have to be careful and follow the shapes of the shadows, because if you see when I let me make the brush smaller. If I click here and drag, I'll get this highlight here and smudge it over the shadow, so you have to be careful and follow the shadows. I do this here on purpose because I don't like this shadow here and I want to get rid of it. You'll see in a second how I can reshape the face with this tool. So I don't want to get rid of this shadow, for example, so I'll follow this direction. But if there's a shadow that you don't want, just go over it and you'll cover it with the highlights. As I said, you need a bit of practice with this tool, but I really like how it works. So See how I smudged that shadow there? So you have to avoid that. Make small strokes. And I got a lot of comments from another tutorial where I used this because people didn't know how to use it. It's just a matter of practice. If you don't know how to use this, or if you cannot get the result that you want, just use the surface blur and use a layer mask, and you'll get almost the same effect. But I like this one better because I have better control. It's a bit slower. Well, actually it's a lot slower than using surface blur, but I like it a lot more because I can create the shapes that I want, and I can shift the light however I want and get the structure of the face and of the body exactly how I want it to. You can use that here on the legs as well, but just follow the shape of the body, because otherwise you will create a big mess there and it's not going to look really nice. There's some highlights here, really not really visible, but there are some highlights there also here. So if you're not really sure, just make one stroke in one direction and then go on the other one, and that way you don't destroy the shadows and the highlights. And that's how I used this tool. I'm not going to spend too much time here. I'm just trying to show you how I used it. Also, you have to be careful on the edges. See what I did here? Oh, you can do things like that if you're not careful. Adjust the brush size whenever you want, whenever you need it. And that's how I used this tool. Let me show you a before and after so you can see before and after. Let's see here if it's visible here on the legs. Before and after. And this is a non-destructive technique because I have this as a clipping mask layer, and if I make a mistake or something like that, I can simply create a new layer and start over again. I'm not affecting the original image. Once you have the skin, you can start making adjustments to this. And again, I used clipping mask adjustment layers, and I started with hue saturation, and I decreased the saturation to -27 because the background is also a bit unsaturated, so I have to match the color. And then I used another color fill with the color code set this as a clipping mask, change the blend mode to soft light, and leave the opacity at 100%. And now you can see that we are starting to the woman already matches the background a lot better. So before and after. I also added some makeup, and I did that with a hue saturation, and just increase the saturation like that, and fill this layer mask with black to hide the effect. Get a soft brush, adjust the size, change the color to white, and paint over the lips. And now you can use the hue slider to change the color. I think I change it slightly like that. And then on another layer I added some eyeshadow. I think it's called eyeshadows, I don't know too much about makeup. And I set this to overlay, and again I use a soft brush, and I think I used the color blue, I'm not really sure. And just paint some shadows like that. Don't worry about the edges because I'll now get the eraser tool, set select a soft brush and start painting and getting rid of the effect where you don't want it, like here on the eyebrows. And when you're happy with that, just drop the opacity until it looks nice to you. And if you want another color, just press Ctrl U to load the hue saturation adjustment, and just play with the sliders here and select the color that you like and click OK. That's how I added the makeup. You can add the wings, but well, actually let's go with the shadows. Let's paint the shadows of the woman. So on the ground, oh man, I'm really terrible at typing. So select the brush tool, set the color to black, decrease the opacity to about 20%, maybe it's too high, but we'll see, and the flow as well. Select the brush and just start painting some shadows. Actually increase the opacity to 40 and the flow as well, because we're going to make the shadows here right under the woman's feet, under the shoes, and here as well. Just paint along the edges, and then you can decrease the opacity to 20% and the flow as well, and increase the brush size. Leave the hardness to 0 and just paint more shadows. Like that. And when you get to the dress, decrease the brush size and just paint a line like that, and then increase the brush size again and paint more shadows under the woman. Shadows will always make your manipulations a lot more realistic. And don't forget the shadows here where the woman sits on the bench. These ones are very important as well. And now decrease the opacity and the flow, and this is just to fade out the shadow, because the closer you get to the contact point here between the bench and the woman's body, the darker the shadow gets. And with the low opacity, what you do is just fade out that shadow. You can paint some shadows here on the bench itself. As you can see, I'm using a really low opacity brush, and that's okay because you want to build up the intensity, and it's always better to use low opacities. So let's see a before and after. So without the shadows and with the shadows, I think it looks a lot better. If you want to go even further, you can add a color to this shadow. So press Ctrl U, set colorize, increase the lightness a bit, increase saturation, and then the hue to make the shadow a bit, to give a bit of blue to it, and decrease the saturation a bit. So before and after, but that's just minor details. Okay, once you have the shadows, you can add the wings. But well, let's go. Before we go with the wings, let's add that hair, because if I add the wings now, it will be hard for you to see how I add the hair. So first let's add that painted hair. Before adding the wings, I will add the hair because it will be easier for you to see how I do that. So open this PSD file with the hair, and this is a stock image made by Cindy Grunston, and this is a really good piece of stock, so I want to thank her for making them, because they are really useful for people like me that don't know how to paint hair. And I used a few ones, the black, the brown, and the light ones, and just select them and paste them here, make them smaller, something like that, just a bit bigger, rotate it slightly, and place them like that. And you can use a layer mask if you want to, or you can even use the warp tool to get the edges to match the hair, like that. And I will also use a layer mask to fade the edges. I have to increase the opacity first. Okay, something like that. And now, in order to match the color and the contrast of the hair, use hue saturation. First I'll desaturate this, and then I'll use levels. Something like that. And for hue saturation, I'll check colorize, because I want to give it that blue tint. So I'll increase the lightness to about 2, and play with the sliders here till I get that blue tone, and desaturate it. Set the saturation to about 20 or 18 and click OK. And then copy another hair stock, and do the same. Paste it, make it smaller. I'll flip it because I'll add it on the other side of the face. And you can add use the warp tool again to adjust the hair. Again, use hue saturation to desaturate, and then you can use curves or levels to adjust the contrast. And if you see that I have some strong highlights here, the way you can get rid of that is using this slider here. And let me put that here. And then you can use hue saturation again to give it that blue color. That, and something like that. And then you can use another one and just place that below. And you can use a layer mask to hide parts of it. Okay, so that's how I added the hair, and you can add some of it on below the woman. Paste it here, make it a bit smaller, not too small though, because this one is supposed to be longer, and place it like that. And just do the same. Use hue saturation to desaturate, and some levels or curves to make it a bit darker. And then get the light one. Then get this other one, copy, paste it, flip it if you want to. Put it here, make it a bit smaller. Like that. And desaturate it. And use levels. So it's the same process, and just repeat it. So that's how I added the hair. Obviously I would spend a bit more time because it's not looking exactly how I want to, but this is just to show you how I did that. Okay, so now you can move on. Actually, let me group this, and let's do the same with this ones. And that's how I added the hair. Now you can move on and add the wings. So open the wings stock image. You can see these are made by The Darkest Hour. It's from DeviantArt. It's free, and these are the best wings that I could find on DeviantArt. They are just awesome, and they are for free. So make sure you credit the artists, because without stock images like this we wouldn't be able to make this kind of artwork. So just give them credit. So make them smaller, make the wings smaller like that. Duplicate the layer, flip it, put it here, just rotate it a bit, just so that it doesn't look as symmetric, because it doesn't look really good if you just mirror them. So you don't want to have that mirror effect. It's not looking too nice. So just make one a bit higher than the other one and rotate it, or even use the warp tool slightly to just distort it just a bit. And once you have that, you can merge them, or you can turn it into a smart object, and that way you only have to make adjustments to one layer. So the adjustments that I did to this, well, first, before making the adjustments, you have to make some shadows. So create a new clipping mask layer and paint some shadows here, because on the back of the woman it's darker. So select a soft brush, decrease the opacity a bit, so use a big brush and just paint some shadows like that, and maybe decrease the opacity just a bit. And you can see a before and after. It just adds a bit more depth to it. And now you can make adjustments. First I used levels, of course, as a clipping mask, because I only want to affect the wings, and I didn't touch these sliders here. I just wanted to darken the highlights, so I used these values here, and I used 224, so you can see a before and after, just to make them a bit darker. And then I used the gradient map as a clipping mask again, and for the shadows I used and then with the highlights I used a lighter tone of blue. Okay, and I set the blend mode of this to soft light and the opacity at 80%. And now you can see that the wings match the background, match the foreground, the woman, and everything looks a lot better. I also made some shadows here on the arms and on the woman's face. So above the color fill layer, I create a new clipping mask layer, which I will name Shadows, and get a soft brush and just start painting. Just reduce the opacity of it. So just paint on the outsides of the woman's body, and this would be the shadows created by the wings. So I think it looks better this way than this. And do the same for the face, but use a lower opacity. And again, use a big soft brush and just paint. Paint along the woman's face using this soft brush. And this would be the shadows created by the hair. So you can see that it looks quite a lot better with these shadows. It creates more depth. When you're done with the shadows, you can add the statue. As I said, I already have it subtracted from the background, and the way I do that is with the pen tool. Make sure you have the path selected, draw a path around your subject, and when you're done, right click and choose make selection. See this option here, and that would select the entire background, and you can delete it. So let me put the statue here. And I'll make it a smart object, make it smaller and put it somewhere here. And you can get rid of this with a layer mask. Okay, like that. And I made the skin of this, well, the statue, I made it softer using another clipping mask layer. And again, I used the mixer brush tool. Someone mentioned on one of my tutorials, I posted a comment saying that the mixer brush is not available on some Photoshop versions, and I didn't know that. If you're gonna use the mixer brush tool, you can use the smudge tool. Just make sure you have the strength to about 10%. Check sample all layers and just start smudging like that. See, and you can make the surface smoother. Another way of doing that is, especially if you have this as a smart object, is go to filter, blur, surface blur, and you can see that you can blur the surface. The result is not as good as with the mixer brush tool, but it's a lot quicker, and if you like it that way, you can do that. I will disable this effect, and I'll continue with the mixer brush tool, and I'm doing just the same thing as I did with the woman's skin. But I have to check sample all layers. And use another brush, it's a soft brush, and just start brushing this and make it softer. Remember that you have to keep in mind to go along the shadows and the highlights in order to keep the same direction and the structure of the body shapes. Okay, so that's how I did that. I'm not going to do it because I'd spend like 20 minutes or something like that going over the entire image. But yeah, let me show you before and after. So this is what I've done so far, and you would do that on all over the statue here. In order to blend this with the background, I used adjustment layers, and the first one I used is curves as clipping mask. Just I made something like this. I wanted to make it a bit brighter, and to increase the shadows with this slider here on the bottom, slightly to the left, to the right, to make it darker, and then increased the stones here. Then I added another color fill as clipping mask again, and the color that I used is 2F4155, and make it as a clipping mask. And the blend mode that I used for this is color at 80%, and that's how I got that blue. If you think it's too blue, you can decrease the opacity to about 50%. I like it better like that. And that's all that I did to this image. And after that, I use just as always the dodging and burn action. You can do that by creating a new layer. Go to edit, fill, from the content select 50% gray, click OK, and you will fill the layer with gray, and then just change the blend mode to overlay, and it becomes invisible. And that way you can use the dodging and burning tools on this layer without affecting the image. And the reason why I use dodging and burning is to enhance the highlights and shadows and things like that. Especially here on the statue, you can really make the muscles stand out just by dodging the highlights like that. Of course, you have to go over all these details. Some people started to complain that my videos are too long, but you can skip things that you're not interested in, or if you know how to do something, just skip that part. I'm just trying to show you how I made this, and you can skip the video if you're not interested. Right now I'm just using the dodge tool. I'm just doing a quick demonstration here. I'm not going to go over all the details. So you can see these highlights here. I'm just going over the highlights. Okay, so that's the dodging. Of course, you would do the same on the woman. With the dodge tool, you can go over all these folds here. You can create the shapes. You can make them stand out. It just takes a bit of practice, but after a while you will get used to it. And now with the burn tool, you can darken this part of the ground. It's a bit too bright. Make sure the range here is set to midtones, and the exposure that I used for both tools is about 12%. I prefer to use low exposures because that way I can build up the intensity however I want. Because on some places you have to burn and dodge more than on others. And after the dodging and burning process, I added a final adjustment layer, which is a photo filter, and I use the color for this, and the color code is 029 CFF, basically a blue color, and set blend mode of this to soft light and just reduce the opacity a bit, increase the density to 80% and reduce the opacity to 30%, and that's the final effect. So before and after, it adds more contrast and it makes it look better, in my opinion. So that's how I made the fallen angel manipulation. I hope you liked the tutorial. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel if you want to receive more videos. If you like my tutorials, make sure you subscribe. You don't have to be a YouTube user, you can subscribe anyway, because I will upload more tutorials in the future. So see you next time.